Thinking Cap Publishing presents Town Cleared, a short story written and read to you by Dave Cap. "Can I get you anything else, Sheriff?" the red-haired waitress asked as she filled up my coffee cup. She was young, I'd say 21 or 22, just around my daughter's age. She was the only waitress here, and truth be told, with the Red Oak Diner's lack of business, one waitress might have been too many. That's how it goes when your town's idea of excitement is a summertime chili contest. "How about you make that an Irish coffee, Jenny?" I grinned, lighting up a cigarette. "Drinking and smoking before 9 in the morning? Hope you have the day off." She filled another man's cup at the booth next to mine. I heard her ask him if he needed anything else, but he shook his head and lifted the coffee cup to his lips. "Never off duty, love." Frankly, it felt like I was always off duty. There was just nothing to do here. I mean, my big boss last week was Mr. Westhaver. He had committed the heinous crime of building a fence that was over 6 feet tall. Riveting stuff, I know. Believe it or not, I let him slide. The decision still haunts me. I'd only been in Springfield for a little less than a month, but my first impression was that no one would notice if this place was wiped clean. I took a long drag from the last cigarette in my pack and watched the smoke rise high above the light fixtures over my table. There was an ashtray next to the tabletop jukebox, which held too many butts for me to admit. Crumpling up the empty cigarette pack, I mopped the rest of my egg yolk with a bit of toast and tossed a $10 bill onto the table. "Big tip," the man at the next booth croaked. He had a head of thinning hair that had more salt than pepper. His face was sunburnt, and deep dark bags clung to the bottom of his eyes. "Great service should be rewarded," I answered, wiping my mustache with the back of my hand. "Ha! Tell it to my wife." He sat back with his plate of flapjacks and patted his keg of a belly. "So you're the new sheriff in town?" "That's right, Sheriff Thomas Rivers." I stuck out my hand and he shook it with a nod. His fingers were so calloused that it felt as though he was wearing a glove made of sandpaper, and each of his nails had a thick layer of dirt underneath them. "Robert Stutford," the man mumbled. "Everyone calls me Stutz." "Surprised we haven't met yet. I just got back from a trip." Stutz ate another mouthful of pancake. "Been gone a while," he continued through chews. "You're talking about a real trip?" I asked. "Not..." Stutz's hearty laugh turned into a phlegmy cough. No, actually a trip. Was overseas." He wiped his mouth. "Was gone for a little over a month." "It's quite the trip." "Believe it or not, I came back early. Came back to catch my wife in bed with another man." He focused his eyes upon the plate and began to tap his fork on the rim. "Married. Divorced." "Lucky. Maybe I'll travel down that same road. Might be a smoother ride." He looked over to the booth I was sitting at. Following his gaze, I realized he was staring at the ashtray. You don't got any more of them, do you?" "Nope. That was my last one, unfortunately," I answered, patting down the pockets of my pants. "Oh, wait a sec." I reached into the breast pocket of my uniform and pulled out a squished-up pack. "Might be stale, but it'll do the trick." He snatched up the single cigarette and garbled something that sounded like a thank you. Then, after a 2-fingered whistle, he called out to Jenny. "Let me get a box of matches, hon?" About an hour later, I was driving past the town hall when a call came on the radio. "Hey, Sheriff, you there? It's Officer Anderson." "Yeah, I'm here. What do you got, Tuck?" "Sheriff, you're going to want to come to the Red Oak Diner." His voice quivered, as if each word was more painful to say than the last. "What are we looking at? Is there a Danish thief on the loose?" I chuckled, waving to old Mr. Westhaver, who was being helped down the street by the mayor of Springfield, Daniel Johnson. The man really was ancient, and still needed to walk with a cane, even with help from the mayor. But he stood up straight when he saw me and waved. Expecting a laugh from Officer Anderson, I checked to see if my radio was still plugged in correctly. You hear me, Tuck? They got some good Danish there. The silence that followed made my hairs on the back of my neck stand at attention. Officer? Only Snowy Static answered. Officer, what is the situation? Think you better come here for yourself, Sheriff. Over and out. The Red Oak Diner's parking lot spaces were taken up either by police cars or local onlookers, eager to see what was going on in their quaint town. I took a deep breath, readying myself for the sea of questions I was about to swim through on my way to the diner door. Police! I boomed, stepping out of the car. A few of the rubberneckers jumped as if my voice was a crack of lightning. What's going on here, Sheriff? One voice asked. Ignoring the question, I held my badge up high. Nothing to see here, ladies and gents. Whether this was true or not remained to be seen. She don't look like nothing, another voice chirped. This was nothing more than a skinny stream of smoke. It could have been stomped out without a second thought. Each passing question fanned it, though, giving it not only the confidence, but the ability to fully blossom into a flame. A flame that would become a wildfire. Yeah, what's going on, Sheriff? We got a right to know. Ain't nothing like this ever happened before. It's gotta be bad if the entire police force had to come. Wait a second, if all the police are here, then who's watching the bank? Where's the mayor? Yeah, where's the mayor? I burst through the glass door to see my entire police force turn to face me like hound dogs at the dinner table, hoping for scraps. All except Officer Anderson, who was standing over a booth. The same booth that Robert Stutford had been sitting at earlier. The hell are you doing? I barked. Fitzpatrick! Fitzpatrick's. Get out there and control the public. Ryan and Michael Fitzpatrick were identical twins. Both had shiny bald heads and close-set eyes with bushy brows, and both looked as though they'd just woken from a deep sleep. What is this, your damn coffee break? My words caught in my throat as Tucker Anderson stepped away from the booth. With half of his face burnt away, Robert Stutford laid across the red vinyl cushion. Dead. Suddenly, the diner door swung open. Jenny? I heard the all-too-familiar squawk of Mayor Johnson. He was a short man with a clean-shaven face and red hair that was nearing its expiration date. We're going to have to ask you to take a step back, Mr. Mayor. Ryan Fitzpatrick pushed the panicked man gently. Don't you touch me, you big oaf! Daniel Johnson slapped the officer's hand away. What is Stutz, fallen into a drunken stupor again? His eyes widened into saucers when he saw Robert Stutford's lifeless body. But wait, where is my daughter? Tucker put a hand up. Don't worry, Mr. Mayor. Jenny's not in the diner. We checked every nook and cranny. It's just old Stutz here and the fry cook, Scott Totoro. There's another body? I furrowed my brow. Anderson nodded. Poor guy's face was burnt to a crisp in the deep fryer. Murder? In my town? Mayor Johnson stammered. Once again, I focused my attention on Stutz. Shards of glass were stuck so deep into his skin that it looked as though they had grown out of his face. The pool of blood which was dripping onto the floor like a leaky faucet had a brown tint. Then I noticed the coffee pot on the floor. The shattered coffee pot. So that was where the burns came from. But there were more burns. Burns that couldn't have come from being smashed in the face with a coffee pot. Blisters had bubbled and popped along Stutz's fingers, each of them leaving a trail of oozing pus. Tuck, you said the cook was burnt to death? I asked. His face was buried in hot oil. Tuck answered. Why, what do you got? Check out his hands. I pointed to Stutz's fingers. Tuck brought his face so close to the corpse that I thought he was going to try and scratch and sniff it to find a clue. He was a handsome man, with a head of wavy black hair and a closely maintained 5 o'clock shadow. Didn't notice these. He stroked his chin. Think he tried to shield himself from the coffee pot? Placing my hands on my hips, I shook my head. Nope. Come on, let's go see the other body. I think I'll stay behind for this one, Mayor Johnson squeaked. That'd be for the best, Mr. Mayor. I tipped my hat. The bastard had been as nosy as my ex-wife ever since I arrived here. At my old gigs, any mayor would stay as far away from me until it was absolutely necessary. And even sometimes they wouldn't meet me face to face when it was necessary. Not Mayor Johnson, though. He all but rode along with me. The man was like a child, rolling down the windows to wave at everyone, trying to talk on the radio, asking me to turn on the siren. Half the time I packed a snack in the back seat, just in case he got hungry. I can now say with confidence that the smell of cooked human flesh is uncomfortably similar to a plate of baby back ribs. The kitchen was an absolutely disgusting picture of disarray. Tubs of uncooked chicken were next to bundles of vegetables. The sink was filled with strainers of sticky day-old pasta. Grease seemed to be the chosen coat of paint for not only the walls, but all of the appliances too. And streaks of flour were scattered around the room, making me feel like I was standing in a Miami nightclub. The cook was lying on his back. His face was charred black in some areas, but most spots glistened orange and red. The worst part were his lips. They had shriveled upwards like two worms, making it look as though he was smiling. Fucked up, I know, but I couldn't help but think he died laughing at the irony of it all. I can tell you exactly what happened, I said confidently. Stutz stunk this man's head into oil. Stutz? Why, he wouldn't harm a fly. Well, maybe not a fly, but certainly a fry cook. That's where the burn marks on his hands came from. His fingers dipped into the pool as he deep-fried this poor son of a bitch. I thought for a moment. Do me a favor and grab a vial of Stutz's blood and get it over to your town's lab. I want them to check something for me. A lab? Tuck sounded as though I had just asked him to solve a quantum physics equation. Sheriff, we don't got no lab here. I let out a deep sigh. Okay, get the vial of blood and bring it to the station. I'll take care of it from there. We apprehended Jenny Johnson that night. She was blubbering on and on about how she saw Stutz burst into the kitchen, but she didn't follow because he had a crazed look in his eyes. Afterwards, he sat back down at the booth and asked for another cup of coffee. When she began to fill his cup, he grabbed her, though. Grabbed her and swung at her face. So she defended herself with the coffee pot. Through messy blubbers of drool and snot, the girl screamed, "You have to believe me, Sheriff. Please believe me." Almost on cue, Mayor Johnson opened the door to the interrogation room, which also doubled as the kitchen. "Release her now," he bellowed. "My daughter was just defending herself from Stutz. Whole town knows his wife has been two-timing him with Scott Tortoro. He must have just snapped. If anything, she was doing a service to the town. Frankly, Sheriff, it's a hell of a lot more than you've done since arriving." I released her. I released a murderer on the mayor's orders. Yes, I was the head of police, but in this quiet little town, Mayor Johnson was still the captain of the ship. The town was on edge for the next 2 days, but on the third day, it seemed to simmer down. Jenny went from a stone-cold killer to a civil servant faster than I changed my pants. She helped everyone and anyone, whether they needed help or not. On the fourth day, I had all I needed. I demanded Mayor Johnson to call a meeting for the entire town that night. At first he refused. It seemed that the whole town had changed their opinion on me from the nice new sheriff to a loose cannon who had the audacity to throw sweet little Jenny Johnson into jail. Whether it was out of pity or paranoia of my discovery, I couldn't say, but the mayor finally agreed, and much to my surprise, The entire town showed up, all 57 of them. The town hall was the biggest building in Springfield, but was barely the size of a McDonald's. Everyone filed into the left and right sections of the wooden benches, which were separated by a carpeted aisle. As I stood behind the podium, ready to deliver my news, Mayor Johnson stepped up next to me. Like a child trying to sneak a peek at their parents' Christmas time shopping list, he peered over my shoulder. Because I was nearly double the size of the man, I was able to easily nudge him out of the way. I cleared my throat, and the entire room slowly descended into silence. I know it's been a stressful couple of days. We've been fine, Sheriff, a voice called out. It's you who wants us to be scared. We're all behind Jenny. Yeah, she was protecting us. Why'd you allow this meeting, Mayor? Hey! I banged my fist onto the podium. Listen up. It's for your safety. I received the results of Robert Stutford's blood work and... And what? The mayor asked, still trying to peek over my shoulder. And, well, he had a very high white blood cell count, as well as unusual antibodies. What the hell does that mean? Mayor Johnson hollered. It means Mr. Stutford was infected. Infected with a disease that caused him to murder Mr. Totoro. Aw, come on now. We all know about Stutz's wife, a crotchety voice echoed through the hall. Even if there was a disease, Jenny killed the carrier, said another man. Oh, that's why you're calling this meeting. You want to hold a parade in Jenny's honor. Mayor Johnson wiped a handful of sweat from his forehead before gesturing to Jenny to step up to the podium from her front row seat. The whole room began to applaud. No, don't touch her! I pushed Mayor Johnson back. The disease that Mr. Stutford carried is spread through skin-to-skin contact. It could take minutes, or it could take days for the effects to show. A woman stood up and stepped into the aisle that separated the benches. And what exactly are these effects? She asked with air quotes. Violence. A desire to kill. That's why Stutz murdered Scott Totoro. You said it yourself, Officer Anderson. The man would have never harmed a fly. I pointed to Tuck, who stood to my left. I don't buy this for a single second, the woman answered. Where do you even come from anyway, Sheriff? About half the room muttered in agreement. How could we trust you? A nearly toothless man barked. There was a solid thud, followed by a dragging sound that made the entire courtroom forget how to speak. It was old Mr. Westhaver walking down the aisle. Slowly he limped forward until he reached the middle of the town hall. Now you all listen, and you listen good. Sheriff Thomas Rivers is a kind and a trustful man. This ain't no hoax. I believe what he says about this virus. Well, that's nice of you to say, Mr. Westhaver. I gave a half smile. What I believe needs to be done is... Mr. Westhaver stuck up a shaky hand, signaling he wasn't done speaking. I'll be going back to my home and locking every single door and window. I'll need no more assistance in my day-to-day activities, and I thank you for your help. But know that if anyone is thinking of coming near me, even with the best intentions, I won't hesitate to put a bullet in your brain. And with that, he whipped out a magnum from inside of his jacket. Instantly, Officer Anderson pulled out his gun. Drop the weapon. He stepped forward and toward the aisle. I will not, Mr. Westhaver's voice cracked. I have no desire to hurt anyone. He pointed his gun at everyone in the courtroom. I just want to be left alone. He continued to flail his gun around. The townsfolk's collective scream seemed loud enough to shatter glass. Some dove onto the ground, while others pushed their way towards the exit. The Fitzpatrick twins, who flanked opposite ends of the room, pointed their guns at Mr. Westhaver. Everyone remain calm, Michael Fitzpatrick bellowed as about half the room burst through the door. How can you expect us to remain calm? Asked a woman who was frozen in fear. If what the sheriff is saying is true, then any one of us could be infected. And if it only takes skin-to-skin contact, well, I ain't infected. Me neither. I feel perfectly fine. I got a knife, so you better leave me and my family alone. Oh yeah? I got a shotgun at my house. The remaining townsfolk crashed into one another like two trains on the same track. Some began to push. Some began to swing. And everyone continued to yell. It was the definition of chaos. Mr. Westhaver pointed his gun to the crowd. It seemed as though he was ready for someone to attack him. With trembling hands, he cocked his magnum. Officer Anderson lowered his gun as a skinny stream of smoke wafted up from its barrel. At first, Mr. Westhaver looked confused, dropped his weapon, and felt his chest. Reaching for his back, he began to wail in pain as pain washed over him. With his shirt quickly turning red, he fell face first to die in a pool of his own blood. Oh my God! Jenny screeched as her skin turned a ghostly white. You killed an old man! Daddy, how could you let this? She retched as tears began to stream down her face. How could you let this happen? How? Jenny threw back her head and howled ferociously before charging towards her father. Just before she was able to touch the mare, Officer Anderson turned and fired once more, this time landing a headshot. The bullet went through her right ear, causing her thoughts and dreams to splatter onto the far wall. After that, Officer Michael Fitzpatrick stepped down the aisle, as all of Springfield continued to push and punch one another. Lay down your weapon, Officer Anderson, Michael Fitzpatrick boomed, pointing his gun at Tuck. Don't do anything crazy, Mikey. You know you ain't supposed to aim a gun at another officer. He's one of us. A good guy. Officer Ryan, Fitzpatrick said, stepping behind his brother. He killed 2 civilians without trying to de-escalate the situation, Michael answered over his shoulder. I told him to lower his weapon, and you saw Jenny. She was a step away from killing her father, Tuck answered defensively. Here, I'll surrender my gun, officer. Tuck bent over to place his gun onto the floor, and Officer Anderson breathed a sigh of relief. Now kick it over to me, Anderson. You see, he's cooperating, Mikey. Ryan rubbed his brother's shoulder gently. Tuck was just about to kick his gun over to the Fitzpatrick brothers, but he paused. Wait a second. How do I know you ain't infected? You're the one who brought Jenny Johnson in. Michael Fitzpatrick narrowed his eyes upon Tucker Anderson, and his lips twisted into something that faintly resembled a grin. As if hung up by marionette strings, he stepped forward, his movements slow but deliberate, like something had taken over his body. Something that wanted to kill. He froze. His gun pointed at Tucker Anderson. Opening his mouth, he tried to speak, but his voice had failed him. When his body hit the floor, the entire hall shook. He killed a police officer! Everyone in the room turned to Officer Ryan Fitzpatrick, who dropped his gun to the floor and began to sob. I had no choice. Officer Anderson was right. My brother was infected. Well, how do we know you're not infected? Someone yelled. Yeah, what kind of man kills his own brother? Before Officer Fitzpatrick had a chance to answer, a man leapt on top of him and began punching his neck. Over and over and over again. It wasn't until the geyser of blood that I realized the man wasn't punching Fitzpatrick. He was stabbing him. I killed him! He screamed savagely. The man held up his dripping knife into the air and everyone stopped fighting. The silence that swept over the hall was fit for a grave. "What's the matter?" he asked. "You're covered in his blood!" 3 in a row for Tuck. It only took days for Springfield to go from a population of 57 down to 3. Truth be told, I wasn't expecting the town to strip itself down to the bone so quickly. Nods were replaced with fists and words with bullets. The only place these poor people escaped to was 6 feet underground. We held daily meetings at the town hall where Mayor Johnson had been shacked up since the clearing. A couple of townsfolk began to tear away at the building, disgusted that their leader allowed something this catastrophic to happen. They would have succeeded in burning the building to the ground if it weren't for the virus. So the mayor boarded up the front door and all the windows with 2x4s. The outside of the building had been chipped away down to the brick in some areas, and the sections that were still lucky enough to keep their cream color were splashed with red. A shuddering sight, to say the least. Mayor Johnson had deadbolted the back door of the building, which led directly to his office. After a precise knock, the drum beat to "We Will Rock You" by Queen, and a series of questions that grew more difficult by the day, he would allow me in. On the last day, he asked me to come an hour before our usual meeting time. I found it slightly peculiar, but then again, Daniel Johnson had been more than slightly peculiar ever since his daughter died before his eyes. "Tuck here yet?" I asked as the door groaned open. No, just us. If he only meant us two. But Mayor Johnson believed that the population of Springfield had gone down from 57 to 4. 3 chairs were set up in the opposite end of the desk. He sat, and as I took my place on the far right seat, the familiar sour smell of decay wafted around my head. Perched up in the seat next to mine, with a hole in her head large enough to see through, was Jenny Johnson. Her skin may have been the color of curdled milk, and her lips may have been 2 thin lines of blue. But the mayor of Springfield believed that she was alive. It was something about how her body turned over after Tucker Anderson blew her away that made him know she was perfectly fine. "So where's Tuck?" I swatted at a buzzing fly. He'll be here shortly," the mayor answered, tapping his foot anxiously. "We've been talking." He gestured towards Jenny. "And well, do you trust Officer Anderson?" "Sure," I nodded. "I mean, he did his absolute best. I think he's vital to the rebuild." Mayor Johnson looked at Jenny. Okay. It's all right. I'll call for help." He picked up the receiver to an antique rotary phone, but I quickly snatched it away from him. "Bad idea, Mr. Mayor. Calls will bring unwanted questions, wouldn't you agree?" "You're right. The last thing we need is for anyone to know what has happened here. If we are going to repopulate this town, we can't have word of this getting out." Back to Tuck. I switched the subject. "I'm guessing you don't trust him." "Not just me. Jenny, too. Ain't that right, Jenny?" I turned to the lifeless corpse and tasted vomit. "He killed 2 people that night, and nearly my daughter. That's not even counting after the clearing." "Then you think..." "I think he's infected, Sheriff," Mayor Johnson answered, crossing his arms over his chest. "And I'm going to get him, Sheriff. Look what I got here." He pulled out a shotgun from underneath his desk. "I ain't ever gonna forgive him what he tried to do to my sweet Jenny. I'm going to blow his ass away, and we'll be ready to build Springfield back up." The drumming on the door made Mayor Johnson lose his train of thought. Let him in, Jenny." He fidgeted back and forth into his seat. "How about I get it?" I said, standing. "What a gentleman. Keep that in mind, Jenny. Officer, I tipped my hat after opening the door. Town's still empty, Tuck said after taking his seat to the left of Jenny. Mr. Mayor? He gave a half smile as his nostrils flared at Jenny's stench. Stroking his chin, Mayor Johnson fixed his eyes upon Tucker Anderson. Officer Tuck, I have a question. Yes, sir? How many people have you killed since the clearing? Well, hard for me to count, Tucker answered thoughtfully. Quite interesting. What is, Mr. Mayor? Tuck asked. Ignoring the question, Mayor Johnson's hands disappeared under his desk. And that's not even counting you almost killing my daughter, Jenny. Right. I'm sorry, officer, the mayor said. Sorry for what, sir? Confusion began to fill Tuck's voice. I cleared my throat. Officer Tucker, Mayor Johnson believes that you are infected. No, I'm not. I haven't touched anyone at all. Well, you did get a vial of blood from Scott Totoro for me to get tested. If this virus can be spread from skin to skin contact, then it could definitely be spread through blood as well. Tuck ran his fingers through his hair. The wrinkles in his forehead darkened. You're right. I've killed so many men and women. I blew this poor girl's brains from her head, he sobbed, pointing to Jenny. Do what you must. An honorable man, dying species. Pulling out my magnum, I aimed at his chest. No! Mayor Johnson cried out. I will be the one to take his life. As soon as I heard the mayor pull the trigger of his shotgun, I whirled around and blasted him in the heart. Both of the men fell backwards from the impact of their respective blows, and both of them died. I even shot Jenny once more in the head just to be safe. Reaching into my breast pocket, I pulled out a slip of paper that had 7 digits written on it. I dialed the numbers on the mayor's rotary phone, and after a moment, the line silently picked up. Town cleared. Hey guys, thank you so much for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you liked this video, check out my other ones. I got another short story as well as a few chapters from my first novel, Trilon, The Flight of the Codus, which is now available on Amazon. So stay tuned and be nice to each other.